Regional School Committee on February 26, 2025 at 7 p.m. I am Linda Lukoski, Chair of the School Committee. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. A reminder, this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'm going to read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and a wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Can we please rise for the pledge of allegiance? The next item is the oral communications from the public. Seeing none. The next item, I'd like to ask the committee's permission to allow the superintendent to speak on an item that is not on the agenda because it was not anticipated at the time the agenda was posted. As you saw from his email today, the ice and snow melt has caused major leaks in the middle school gym, and I would like the superintendent to provide us an update.
Thank you, Linda. You saw my message. Hopefully, you saw my message. This blossomed as far as a topic over the last 24, 48 hours. I think all of you can attest to the fact that this is not a new discussion. This is unfortunately something we've been dealing with for many years. As the building has aged, it has gone from a building that had leaks to a building that routinely leaks. And so the middle school wall, as we've lovingly referred to it as, those of you on the warrant or the warrant subcommittee, the finance subcommittee that signed warrants, you know how much we've spent on cleaning and painting and roof repairs, hundreds of thousands on roof repairs over the years. There was a rumor that was started that it was oil, that it was cancer-causing, all kinds of creative rumors that were created. So the message I sent out clarified, we haven't tested it in the last year and a half, but I can say 2 years in a row. One, based on a request, someone made an inquiry to the Newbury Board of Health in spring of '22. And so we actually worked, RPF Associates, I believe is the name. I had it, my draft message, I had it the wrong name, but environmental agency, they do the testing. They are one that we have worked with quite a bit over the years, and I would call them alarmist, right? Their job is to find anything and everything that can be found, to the point where we often find, or having the discussion where, yes, there were 12 mold spores found in a room, but the count outside was 15,000. So we know the systems are doing their job, and if you're surviving outside the window, you're probably safe inside the classroom. So those types of discussions, they are very sensitive in their testing. So we did testing in spring of '22. There's a report we have from June of '22 that was specific to that, call it that section of the building, kind of the performing arts rooms, locker rooms, middle school gym, mat room, and tested that area. There was some further questions the following year. We actually then worked with Mike Feeney from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, who is also a very particular individual, and he spent hours and hours and hours. At the time, that was with Chris Walsh and Kyle Warren. So that assessment was completed on this campus in literally every space, whether it was a closet or it was a classroom or it was a larger space. I'm not going to remember the name of the machine, but there's a machine that assesses contaminants, airborne, and so it's the air quality, which is obviously the concern. So in both of those tests, all of that came back negative for any concerning contaminants, concerning mold levels, any mold. You know, we did a bunch of extra testing last year because of leaks in kind of the connection of the new and the old building at the middle school, and then this back academic wing here. So we've done lots of testing. We have always tested as far as the professionals tell us to go. Sometimes that has been test after test after remedy after test after remedy after test, and stop when they say, we're satisfied, this is a safe situation. Sometimes that's been a quick fix. There are other times that, like last spring, where it was a fix and then a test and then a wait and then a retest and another fix. So I guess I'll stop there to say that the middle school wall in the gym, the middle school gym wall is ugly. It looks bad. I can see how parents could say it looks like oil and start that rumor. It's not. It's basically the water saturated roof, and it comes down stained. When the water comes down, it piles up. And so that is what we have. It used to be, I know we did it this past fall, we cleaned it with the hope of generally it stayed at bay over the winter when there's no water moving. And so it's then once we get the rain and it's warmer and things expand and stuff, that's when it starts to come back down. We cleaned it, I think Ryan painted it, and I want to say within a week it was back, which is the quickest it's ever been. So so there's comments in there about it looks worse than ever. Yes, absolutely, right? And I think the only solution here, we're looking at, are there specific areas that we could target and do more? Throw another $20,000 at it. But the reality is the fix is millions of dollars, right? The fix is that section of roof, the total roof estimate was $11.5 million. So that one section is easily $1 million plus. And without doing the rest of the connections, who knows if that solves it. So, so there isn't a quick solution to stop that. We will continue to monitor, continue to test indoor air quality as needed and address it. But that is purely rumor. Certainly doing our due diligence to see if there's any part that we had or anyone internally had in starting or spreading that rumor. But it is a rumor. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Does anybody have any?
I feel like this is going to be leading the witness. But can you tell us, obviously the school gym is closed, why it's closed?
Oh, thank you. Yes, that is, thank you.
I feel you hit the wall, but you
That
didn't
is-
hit the actual reason why it's closed.
I got stuck on the testing. So yes, the simple reason why it's closed is, you all know the snow outside, you know not a fan of flat roofs, I get it. That is the thing. But when you have this amount of snow, and there was 1.5 feet of snow load, you get warmer temperatures like now, we're going to get another 1/2 inch of rain, 3/4 of an inch of rain tomorrow on top of that. When the water is sitting there, there's nowhere for it to go. It can't get to the drains, so it finds the path of least resistance. So the gym right now, someone was talking about buckets and this, that, absolutely. They're everywhere. It's center court. It's everywhere in the gym. So we closed the gym temporarily. It's not sealed off, it's taped off so kids can't go and slip in the water. And splitting the gym as needed for PE classes, so sharing the high school gym is obviously a very large gym to be able to accommodate classes, but it's only closed because of the water. When the water stops, whether it's because we go into another drought, which I don't want, but man, I would love it right now, or we can actually find a fix, then we will open it with the wall as it exists today because it's safe. Thank you for leading the witness. A very important point that I failed to miss or failed to mention.
So I have another semi-leading question.
Sure.
So do you prefer that someone goes to social media to ask these kinds of questions, or do you prefer some sort of different avenue if they have a question on what's going on in the building?
Thank you for that question. Leading as it may be, right? I am not going to respond on social media. I don't have the time lately. I would love to get on and do a little more, right, out there information. And I think Kitty does a great job of pushing information out, but I'm not on there to engage. So I've said this to parents in the past that try to engage in a conversation through social media. I will likely not see it. So if you have a question, please contact me. I believe, I like to think, I hope that I'm approachable. My door's open, my phone's open, my email's open. I've never not responded to an email or a call or people who just stop by. So absolutely, if there is a question, I sure hope parents would reach out and ask a question rather than making assumptions. Or a staff member or whoever it is that's putting that information out on social media. Yeah, facts do not live on social media these days.
Anybody else? Thank you, Brian. Upcoming DCC meetings. The next DCC meeting is tomorrow night here in the library at 6:30. I'd like to ask your input and then the DCC's input on changing the next two DCC meeting dates. The April meeting is currently in the middle of school vacation when a lot of people go away. We all missed that when we were setting it up. So we would like to move that one earlier in the month to April 10th, and since that moves it quite close to the current March date, I would also propose moving that one early to March 20th. Does anybody have an issue with those two?
Can you just repeat those dates again? I'm sorry. I'm just like pulling up my calendar.
April 10th and March 20th. The next item is the 2025-2026 school year calendar. At the last meeting, we talked about the placement of the November, January, and March professional development half-days. Dr. Bates sought input from the PD committee for us, so I will turn this over to her for what her...
So with the proposed changes that were discussed, there were no issues that were related to either, I had thought perhaps the mid-year assessments, and there were no issues related to that. I think we had talked about the movement of the January day being due to struggles with families being able to find childcare sort of 2 weeks in a row. It was brought up, would we be creating that same situation in March by moving that March day? So we would have a March PD day followed by elementary conferences the next day. But no other feedback besides that.
So just to confirm, the three that Anna spoke with the PD committee about the concept of moving November 7th to October 31st, so that the Friday wasn't immediately followed by a Monday, then a Tuesday Veterans Day off, January 9th to the 16th, and March 6th to 13th. And the 6th to the 13th was just, I believe that was Owen who was like, man, March is long, be nice to have a halfway. So that was, I think that was the science behind that suggestion. But those were the three date changes that Anna spoke with folks about.
on those changes in the schedule for January, March, and November.
So did we move the November to October 31st? Because I don't see it. Am I looking at
Well,
the
we
wrong
have
version?
to vote on
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah, so the one you have in your
Thank you.
packet. Yeah, so the one we have in the packet is the one that you saw at your February 12th meeting 2 weeks ago. I would say based on the feedback from the PD committee, we're open to other things. I think the one thing with the October 31st and it being Halloween, right? There's some pros and cons there. I don't know. I think you would get a mixed response putting a PD day on Halloween, I think is a safe way to put that. So I think, in our conversations I feel comfortable saying that this calendar as we provided it last month, earlier this month, makes the most sense.
Okay. After hearing from Dr. Bates, I'd ask that the committee that we can bring the calendar back for a vote on March 12th. Separately, I wanted to check with the committee members.
Can we hang on a second? Because I'm not sure, I don't know what Paul's putting in his minutes to say the decision was there. Is it staying the same? Is stuff changing? Sorry. Didn't use it. Yeah.
Well, I think they had mentioned what dates they were, and
So I think the question would be if we will bring it back on March 12th. I mean, you could approve it tonight if you wanted, but we'll bring it back on March 12th, but it would be helpful I made the statement, I think the way I proposed it 2 weeks ago makes sense. If people think that makes sense, or if there's that October date, the January date, or the March date, anyone would like to say, hey, I think this makes sense, to move it as discussed, that feedback would be very helpful right now.
Okay, so what I'm looking at right now is what you proposed last time.
Nothing's changed here,
Yeah, and
yes.
so now some of these other changes are, okay, just trying to clarify.
Do you need clarification what the dates are that he changed?
So not just the dates, but are we looking to have it come back with the new dates on it? Or are we going to look to have it come back the way that it looks right now? Like,
That's my
we're both
question.
confused as to like, what's coming back?
So I need
Does anybody have,
So I
I
think
guess I need to look at,
the way that I understood it was that we have to give Brian, similar to the budget, right? We give Brian guidance tonight. He comes back with a proposed budget, and then we vote, proposed
Right.
calendar. And then we vote on that calendar with sort of everything that we've talked about rolled in there.
right,
That was my understanding.
because we asked Anna to check if anyone had a problem with those dates. So now she said that they didn't have a problem with those dates. So, and then I asked if anybody here had any issues with the date proposed. So now we're going to tell Brian that since no one has an issue with the dates being changed, that he's now going to come back with the dates changed, if that makes sense.
Or not.
Caitlin has thoughts.
No, I will,
Keep talking, he'll adjust it.
I will own that my confusion was, for some reason in my brain, those changes would come back and reflect in this document, and then we would discuss which one looked better. And so I will own that my confusion lied in the fact that first, I was like, this looks really similar to the last one I looked at. And then we're talking about changes. So now I completely understand. That was my, okay, so it wasn't just me. That was my confusion, and I apologize.
Gotcha.
And that's why you're getting this face of like, where are the changes?
sorry.
Nope,
So-
that was me.
So yeah, it wasn't, I mean, I didn't take away last month that people wanted to come back with a proposal for that, but to confirm, the changes would be, as you're looking at it, the November 7th half-day, 1 week earlier to October 31st. And again, this is just what was discussed. It could be moved a week later to November 14th. So it was moving November 7th to October 31st. It was moving January 9th out a week to the 16th. And it was moving March 6th out a week to the 13th. So in that case, it would be 2 weeks in a row for elementary. There'd be a PD day on the 6th, and there'd be 2 half-days, the 19th and 20th for elementary conferences. And then in January, the 9th move to the 16th would back it up against the MLK weekend. Probably good for families, not great for staff attendance. In
So I'm not sure how to word this, but can you explain about like the not great for staff attendance? Because like, as a teacher, is like when I have to attend PD, I have to be there. So is this a time when you could clarify that? Because that comment, I feel like I've heard before, and I feel like if this is a PD day, then
Yeah, so,
I'm gonna-
so yes. There is, actually, Anna pulled up some data. Any staff member everyone's required to be there, yes, right? If it's PD, it's a required day. Tried to do some averages over the last few years. On PD days for teachers, it's about 15% worse. There's 15% more absences on a Friday PD day compared to a regular Friday. For instructional assistants, it's about 150% more absences on a PD day, half day on a Friday, than a
do they
typical
have
Friday.
specific PD designed for them?
We do.
The IAs, they do?
We do, yes. Yep. Yeah.
Brian, what are you going to do to fix this?
Right? I mean, if someone's taking a day all the time, I can go after a pattern. If someone chooses occasionally to be out a day, if it's a accrued day that they're contractually allowed to take, the contracts don't say you can't be absent on PD days. I would love to argue that language.
So separately, I was going to bring this up, but I'm thinking from the discussions we had last meeting that you felt Wednesdays would probably be less of a option that people would want to take a day off that day. So my question is, would you think that Wednesdays would be a better professional development day than a Friday?
I think that it's really hard to, I think for people to engage in the hard work of professional development that we ask them to at the very end of a week. I think it's, that's not easy. I think it would be easier for people to engage in that work on a Wednesday. It would be more productive. I don't know if that's necessarily the right move at this point, but I do think that, I even think about myself in my own capacity, that I work better when it's not at the very
Why
end
would
of
you
the
say you don't think that that would be a better option? It's
So
what,
it's better, if we're looking only at the purpose for like educator professional development, would we get a bigger impact out of that? Yes. We might also see some of these absences shift from Fridays to Wednesdays too.
but I think
So-
we have to look at it as what is in the best interest of the district and the professional development that we're offering.
Yes, yep.
And I don't know if it's something that can be changed in a contract here or anything, that,
I don't think we specify the day, do we?
Specify the day. The days are not in the contract, nor is there any distinguishment or distinguishing factor between a sick day on a PD day or a half day or a full day.
And I think, well, because PD essentially is like for licensure, so if they're not getting it with you, then with their district, they're going to have to be responsible for getting it elsewhere, so,
Yes.
yeah.
Can I just go off of that?
Yeah.
So missing a PD day, so missing a district-specific PD that Anna and leadership team have said, like, this is beneficial for IAs because our students are showing a need in a certain area. If a professional misses that district-specific PD, do they need to then make it up? Because we're saying, like, I'm not talking about just random for licensures, like, those are always incoming, you can go to a lot of places to get your PDs. But for the Triton specific, where we've identified needs, and Anna has identified ways to kind of put learning in place to assist in educating our students, and somebody is unable to attend whatever day of the week it is for whatever reason, do they then need to make that up, or go back and kind of figure out, like, where does that fall for them professionally, I guess is my question.
Do you have an answer to that? I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
I think it might be like very specific about what they were missing. If it were a particular training that they needed to be an MCAS test administrator and they missed that, yes, that's going to have to be made up. But everything would have to be made up within their contractual day, which means we would be pulling people from either, if we're talking instructional assistants, from services they're providing as part of an IEP, or teachers from classrooms in order to make that up.
Do you think starting first off in the day with the PD and having a delayed start might be a better option?
We pulled that 2-3 years ago when we pulled the Wednesday, and it was wildly unpopular. I think it would be, I think everyone would be, from a PD perspective, from a value add, Monday morning, Tuesday morning, absolutely. But I don't know the answer why, but it was not popular with parents or staff. I think say less, if I don't have that in front of me, I think it was much less popular with parents, that it was challenging. It's much easier to figure out daycare in an afternoon than try to get, it's kind of like those delayed openings when everyone's super thrilled with that.
So, wow, if I don't talk. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Wednesday would be better for the outcome for the professional development, which is basically all we're concerned about at this point.
I believe that Wednesday would be a better day for professionals to engage in
Then
professional work.
I suggest we move it to Wednesdays.
I'm right there with you.
Second the motion.
Does anybody else have any strong feelings on? Because to me, it's more about the professional development
Yeah.
and the district.
As an educator who has their PD on Wednesdays in the afternoon, I prefer it on a Wednesday. You know, I show up, it kind of splits the week. This is just me talking personally, but yeah. I would be interested to see the numbers if you shifted to Wednesdays from Fridays. Again, you would,
Yeah.
you'd have to see. I might have to do some number crunching where I am too to kind of see.
Yeah, and I would say even if, again, so if it's, 15% more absence, and that's 3 or 4 people for a teacher, there's a much larger discrepancy with instructional assistants that have a lot less required, right? Like CKLA training or something like that, that's required in order for you to have a job. But I do, even if the numbers didn't improve drastically, I think the quality overall of the experience for educators is better on a Wednesday. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind about that. My only hesitation is that the decision 2 or 3 years ago, and I have to pull it back up, I think it was 2021, 22, the decision was for me to poll families, and we polled families, and we polled Wednesdays, the preferred day of the week, and it was resoundingly unpopular to have it on Wednesdays. So,
But in
as
the
a
end, like, I'm going to be honest, just like as an educator and just thinking about our students, it's great that we poll the parents, but in the end, I want to be thinking about the educators who are educating our students and what's best for them. Yes, as a parent, maybe it would be nice if I could take a long weekend. I'm sorry if I'm being a little out there, but I think when we talk about why are we here, we're here for the students, we're here for the educators, and I don't know. I wasn't
I
here
just-
3 years ago, but I just would
I
think
guess
that
I'm
maybe
just
it
a
should
little
be-
bothered with that the IAs have fought so long to have professional development for IAs, and to hear that they're the ones not attending the professional development is a little troublesome to me.
I would, without hashing this out publicly, this has been an ongoing debate about, Kelly, you asked about, do they have kind of role-specific? And so we don't have, with 112, 15 IAs, we don't have the ability to roll out in-person trainers, right? If Anna's working with a group of 30 teachers and Shannon's working with a group of 20 teachers, we don't have the ability to have enough live bodies to be able to cater to the specific situations for all of those IAs. A lot of them one-to-ones, high level of support. A lot of it's about behaviors and accessing curriculum, right? So some of that ends up being kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Remote, what do you call it? Asynchronous
Yeah.
learning, that we give them time and they can earn credit hours and such. So it is a source. It is something that there are others that say it's not helpful to me. And we say, well, it may not be helpful to you, but this is the role that we need you in now. And so there is a challenge there, as far as I know 2 women at the end of this table have spent a lot of time talking and planning.
And I'm going to come at you from an educator who doesn't, I unfortunately have to attend PD that doesn't necessarily always pertain to me, but I do understand that it's something that's my responsibility, and I need to show up, and, yeah, I just, is it always going to be perfect? No, but,
I will say, though, there is a lot of choice built in
Yep.
for most of the instructional assistants. Beth has done a great job of providing really targeted professional development for some of the IAs at her programs at Newbury, but other than that, we have a lot of options and choice that,
yeah, probably to even build experience, and it's disappointing to hear that they're not taking advantage of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and right, so I would say, there are a lot who are, right? So when I say there's 150% more, that's the delta between a typical Friday and a Friday. There are a lot of IAs who are engaged in doing an unbelievable amount of work. So it's not the majority, but it is we'll say, a long-standing debate that Shannon and Anna are perpetually in communication and working through how to make that better.
Just to come to the IA's defense, without saying too much, we got a lot of feedback when we were doing the last contract that there wasn't structured PD for them, and it was kind of, it wasn't as valuable because they were just being told to go online or whatever. So I think that we've improved that in the last 2 years, so I think hopefully it's moving in a better direction.
Yeah, and some of it, right, if it's content specific, it has to be online because we don't have 30 different instructors available
Yeah,
at
I'm
the
trying not
moment.
to,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yes. It has been a good back and
I'm really
forth
gonna
for
talk this
years.
time. So I think the idea of makeup is good, and so I think if we move to Wednesdays, that's great, and the 15% that don't want to go to PD, we can set it up for a Friday afternoon on a long weekend.
I believe Paul's still on PNN, right? Just
I'm
checking.
still on PNN.
Cool,
He
just checking.
is.
No, but seriously, I mean, just to what Kelly says, I mean, this is what it's all about, this PD. It's about teaching the teachers and bringing them up to speed, and if we're giving them a pass.
So, just two thoughts here. One, I suspect the reason that families liked Fridays a heck of a lot better was because it's easier for one or both parents or guardians, if there are two in the family, to be taking off on a Friday afternoon than it is on a Wednesday afternoon. But I also suspect that for teachers who have young children, that and a lot of them are here in the district, that they are going to struggle to find childcare because now they're down to possibly one other parent guardian, because one's going to have to be here, that is going to have to try and, either that other one other person is going to have to try and get time off of work, or, right, or they're going to have to find somebody else to provide childcare to that child. Is there a possibility to provide some sort of childcare for those kids? Could we absorb them into kids club for that afternoon or something like that?
It's an interesting thing to think about.
Absorb, does that insinuate
Oh, you'd have to have more staff.
without a fee?
I mean, maybe it is, maybe it's with, I don't know, I hadn't thought that process through. I'm just thinking like either when the kids were little, either my husband or I could be there on a Friday afternoon. It's a heck of a lot harder. And if I was teaching, then it's only down to my husband, right? To be able to cover the kids on a Wednesday afternoon, which would, I don't know that we would have really struggled to make something like that work, right? If you have two working parents.
So what's the
and
difference
one's in
there between a
school.
Friday or a Wednesday?
I think it's the ease, right? It's a lot easier to say,
easier on a
I'm
Friday.
leaving at noon on a Friday,
Okay,
right?
okay.
Than it is, I'm leaving at noon on a Wednesday, and then I'm coming back to Thursday for my full day of
Gotcha, okay.
work.
Sounds like a great role for National Honor Society students.
Yeah,
I mean, I suspect it's going to open some issues, so I would just, I'm hoping we can maybe think creatively so that we don't put people in bad spots. Because we may end up losing more people in not attending, right? Because if you,
Just going to say, my perspective doing Wednesday PDs after school and half-day Friday PDs, I get a lot more done on Wednesdays. So and that's after a full day of teaching than it is a half-day. And so I fully support moving to Wednesdays. And, when earlier, you said, great for families, and moving that half-day to the 16th in January, and then not so great for teachers. And the thing is, though, is that I'm a family, right? So when we say great for families, that's also our teachers. In general, I like the idea of Wednesdays. I think it will produce better PD. I think that we will have some pushback. So if this is, because we did survey on it a few years ago and we saw the results, and so there'll be more pushback because we're making a change. So if we make this change, then I just think that we should be communicating actively ahead of time about it, after we vote the calendar, rather than waiting for like, oh, here's the calendar at the end of June.
For sure. Yeah, families generally expect it. Sometimes you're approving it in February. Sometimes it's like this. We do it in February and there's a question and we take it to March. But families are asking me last November when school starts so they can book vacations. So yeah, as soon as you decide, I'm assuming on March 12th, this will go out in messages that week, next day to families.
Just mean highlighting.
And highlight any, for sure, highlighting any changes. Yeah, for sure.
Is that what you were actually saying? Because I thought you were saying the same thing I was going to say, which is I think there needs to be some lead up before the vote, which is I thought what you just said, and then I was going to say I second that. And
I mean, I think getting feedback is helpful, but I don't know that there's any feedback that I would receive from parents that would change how I would vote, because I think that the benefit to having the PD earlier in the week for our educators and then as a secondary impact on the students is going to outweigh what I think would in the end be marginal differences between the parents in the district.
so I guess I wasn't going to suggest resurveying or anything like that, but I was going to suggest that before we make, I don't think it should, my personal preference would be to start talking about this through this process now. This is something that we're intending to do down the road and not move to it on a whatever very short notice. Because I feel like this just all of a sudden came up and then like.
Give some time for for people to.
So you're saying
Wait a
not
second.
Yeah.
to implement it next year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could, right? We could put out
Well,
there are districts that do 2 calendars in a row, and we could say, we are planning on doing this next year.
Oh,
Yes.
I didn't mean that. I just thought you meant like not voting on it tonight, to give maybe.
The
people-
thing
No,
is
I was
we've
thinking-
never voted, I mean, we've never requested feedback when we have put out a calendar. Like, we haven't asked parents, does March
We have.
9th? No, you haven't asked if March 9th, like, for last year when we were changing certain dates and stuff, we don't ask parents, is March 9th okay for you? Is no, October 31st good for you? Because I imagine if you poll parents, they're going to say no, that they wouldn't like an October 31st or something. So, to me, we're putting this out, we're going to vote on it on March 12th. And we have from March 12th to September for people to make arrangements that if we decide whatever day professional development is, so they have 7 months to make that decision. So I myself personally, it's about what's best for the district. And families look to us to what is best for the district. And if you guys feel that that Wednesday is better because overall you think it's going to be better academically for our teachers, I feel that that's what should be done. I mean, we've polled parents about Wednesdays, Mondays, whatever, but over the years, your professional opinion is Wednesdays would be better. And we pay you to give your professional opinion. So, and that's what we have to go with. That's my opinion. We will vote on this, but I was bringing it up tonight because I strongly believe if the people to my right feel Wednesday is a better day for PD, that's what we should be giving them.
Do we have a motion on the floor right now? Did you make a motion?
Can I just? I'm sorry, but you've cut me off twice. Like, I recognize you're the chair, and I recognize that I talk a lot. But I just want to say, like, I wasn't suggesting a poll. That's not what I was suggesting. And we have polled before. We've polled about, like, before or after Labor Day starts and stuff like that. So we have polled in the past. My suggestion was that if you very quickly sort of put this out there and say, this is the decision, there's no notice on this, even though there is notice, right? But it's like literally, here's your thing, go plan with it, right? I think you're going to get a lot more pushback, whereas if you say, this is our intent moving forward, right? This year, we're going to keep it on Fridays or whatever, and then the following year, our intent is to move to Wednesdays, and this is the reason why, and it's getting reiterated throughout the year. I think that it will become a lot more acceptable over that time, and there will be less sort of knee-jerk reaction to the emotional, this is being forced on me, right? There's time to assert the reasoning behind it, I think, and hopefully get through to some people with that. That's all I was trying to say.
Well, why couldn't we do that this year? Do the reasoning behind it between now and,
The 12th?
no,
For the rest of, after the 12th, the communication would all be between the 12th and September.
explaining the rationale behind it. That's just my opinion. I mean, we can vote on this. Everybody has an opinion. Go ahead.
Can I make a motion that we move professional development?
You don't need to make a motion. It's just got to be an agreement.
I'm sorry, what you say? It's just.
You don't need a motion because there's no vote here.
Okay.
Can we poll how many people would be okay with moving it to March? At least putting it on
Wednesdays?
March on the brain now. To put it on Wednesdays
For next school year, just so you're clarifying
for
that.
this,
For this coming school year, right?
2026.
Where Narissa, you're thinking of, like, saying this is what's coming forward.
that we
for
would
the
vote it
2000.
on the 12th, but we can put out reasoning between now and September as the
I'm
reason.
just trying to clarify, though,
Nope,
that
that's fine.
you're stating for the next. school
6
year.
months from now.
Yep,
6 months from now.
Is
so
what
that
is being
20
discussed, yes.
yep, yep.
Let's use years here. We're in 25. So
25, 26.
So the 25-26 school year, moving professional development from Fridays to Wednesdays is what you're asking, Linda. And then Narissa's thought is to move it to the school, to move to Wednesdays 26,
26, 27.
26, 27. No, it's fine, 26, 27. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, and your question is to do it for the next school year, 6 months from now, which would be 25, 26. Okay, thank you.
So I would like to take a poll of how many people would like Wednesdays for the 25-26 school year. How many would like 26-27 school year?
I'm agnostic on this one.
What did he say?
I'm agnostic. Or cynical, you can put it a different way.
Okay, so, okay.
So I noticed on the calendar that midterm exams are not on there for the high school, and that for the middle school, the parent-teacher conferences didn't make it back on either. Was there discussion or consideration?
So the plan would be keeping it the same as it is this year. So it was without the half-day for exams. Al messaged, teachers messaged to say, if you want a conference, let us know, the team will get together. If we have a concern, we will reach out to you, but then using those days, and so we're trying to figure out, so that was changed this year, mid-year, that was the way it played out. Al's trying to rework the end of the year and maybe have a couple half-days For the middle school, we've talked about portfolio days, talked about a couple different ways to do that. So it would be the same as it was this year, where there's no half-days for conferences. Teachers understood that, and their requirement is to have the conferences at the request of families, or if there's any issue, obviously, they have to request a conference.
Do you think it would make sense to put them the same days as either the December or the March half-days for elementary schools to give them the opportunity to have it flagged on there? And/or my other comment is going to be the March, we've had a lot of discussion with having a half-day and then having 2 additional half-days for the elementary school. With eliminating the high school midterms, would it make sense to allow the high schoolers a half-day as well, or the high school and middle school in March, for those families that need an older sibling at home to help with the childcare responsibilities?
So I think there were 2 things there. I'll take them separately. So you're saying reinstate middle school conferences just 2 days and do it a month earlier in December in alignment with with the elementary conferences on the 11th and 12th. That was the first.
That was the first, and
Okay.
it is only 2 days right now, right? It was,
It's, elementary is 2 days.
no, I meant the middle school would have been 2 days.
Middle school would have been, high school exam was 4, I think it was 3, right? They had,
3?
I think it was, I'm pretty sure for them it was 3. Yeah. I mean, I can certainly take that back. Yeah, we can certainly take that back as an idea, not a bad idea. And then the March thing, tell me more about the March. So it would be having an additional half-day in March?
Not an additional, so the high school and the middle school used to have in January, the 15th and 16th, say, they had midterms, half-days on the same day that the middle school would have conferences. And if we're not having midterms and we're eliminating those half-days for the high school, and therefore having the middle school shift their thought process, instead of having planned days for these conferences, that perhaps if they put them in March on the 19th and 20th, they would be covering childcare possibilities for families that have kids in both the middle school, high school, and the elementary school, to alleviate some of the concern that we had with the half-day and the PD day and the 2 half-days in the same month.
Okay. I get that now, thank you. So I think it makes sense on the parent side. The missing piece is the reason we had the half-days is because the teachers were freed up because they gave massive exams and had those half-days to correct. If there isn't any reason separate from PD days to have the half-days, right? Can't give them 2 extra PD days because I'm sure the elementary teachers would love those PD days as well. So that's the missing piece. I like the second half of that, though, the solution it provides, but I don't think, yeah, it has to be the same number of half-days unless there's a reason, like half PD day is universal, half PD day for exams. There's a job they're doing on those second half days for conferences. It's parent conferences into the evening. But we could certainly talk about parent conferences for the middle school on the same day as the elementary on the 11th and 12th. We can take that and did I answer that completely? Yes.
Next year, can I propose we put an interactive calendar up?
I'm sorry, what?
Next year, can I propose, if we're going to have discussions like this, an interactive calendar where we change these as we're talking about them?
Oh, yeah.
So you're saying, just because now I'm looking at something that doesn't align with what somebody's saying, and it messes with my whole thought process. So you're thinking of adding back and moving them to match with the elementary school ones
For middle school.
for middle school?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's the 11th and 12th,
12th, okay.
Friday and Thursday and Friday, December 11th and 12th.
Really having anything for the teachers, like why?
Yeah, that does. But if you add in the conferences, then the teachers are conferencing, if parents so choose to have a middle school conference. So they would be doing something.
So middle schoolers have
hear what
had
you're
a
saying.
conference until they eliminated the midterm this year and then negated out the middle school conferences this year.
Okay.
So, right, so I guess I would say the change in the construct was the half-days for them. They weren't required conferences, and they were becoming less and less attended. And so I think there was actually a discussion about if you don't have them back-to-back where you have 10 minutes and not a meaningful discussion, if you're scheduling them separately, you actually could have a more relevant conversation with families who want to have one, or for conversations that have to be had teacher-directed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that was my second question, that you're saying that they just weren't well-attended, and the shortened amount of time was not covering the concerns and issues that either parents or guardians or teachers were bringing up. So that was that decision? Okay, thank you.
That was part of the change that we made this year. Yeah. Yeah. So I can take that back to Al to talk through how it went this year, and then with the idea of we could put 2 half-days back and line them up with the elementary.
Go ahead.
Can I raise one thing about
Yeah.
that? I believe the other thing was that the high school was doing midterm exams during that time, and when the high school eliminated midterm exams, then we were running 2 extra bus runs during the day, or during the week, I guess it was, which was an additional cost.
It is. Do you know what it is a day?
It's like 17,000, I think we split that for,
All of the exams, right?
yeah.
So per day, it's like $4 grand-ish. Yes, there is definitely a cost. I mean, it's not $100,000, but there is definitely a cost. I think the question would be, if it costs $7,000, $8,000, is that worth it for the value add of having the conferences? Again, Al's not here, I don't want to have that discussion without him, but the theory and the thinking was, the idea of not having them stacked into a half-day actually was going to work better. So we can circle back and get that question. Get that question answered. Sorry. Wasn't a complete sentence.
Does anybody else have any other questions on the calendar?
So to confirm, by a 7-1 to agnostic vote, I'm hearing you want a calendar mocked up again, bringing back the Wednesdays, the half-days on Wednesdays. Okay. So we'll largely put them on likely the same Wednesday, but we won't rehash this out because we don't have a visual for Caitlin. So we won't talk about the specific days, but we will bring that back
On the 12th,
on the 12th.
with all the changes.
I apologize, and thank you.
So wait a minute. So what are all the changes? So we'll talk about middle school conferences to see if that could be put on the 11th and 12th. Other than that, we're not changing them because we moved them from Fridays
No,
to.
no, I meant adding the changes in January, March, October.
No, because we moved them all to Wednesdays. So
Oh,
those
yes.
were the half-days.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you, right, looking at January, sorry, Caitlin, I'm going to do this even though you don't have a visual, but a half-day, 2 days after we get back on January 7th will be a challenge. So it would likely bump to the 14th, which means there's a holiday the following weekend, but it's not lined up with that. Whereas February, it looks fine on the 4th versus the 6th. On March, it looks fine on the 4th versus the 6th. So we will bring that back to you.
then,
Can I ask one more question?
certainly.
So is the intent to vote it on the 12th still? Or are you bringing back, I just heard you say I'm bringing back a new draft.
My hope would be that you vote it.
Okay. I was going to say, because I also have parents coming and saying, like, do we have a calendar?
Yeah, oh yeah, they
So-
were ready for it. I always say, yeah, we do it in February. And so
Okay.
all of them emailed me on February 13th.
Yeah.
And I was like, next month.
Okay.
Not all of them. That's not true. I did not get 2,000 emails.
So hopefully we'll be voting it on the 12th.
We will bring it back in a final draft form for your approval.
Okay. FY '26 operating budget development. Before I turn this over to the superintendent, I wanted to take a minute and go back through what's happened in the budget process so far and what's to come. Tonight is the 8th school committee budget discussion this year. Plus, we have had 2 meetings with town representatives and are scheduled to have a 3rd meeting tomorrow night. The budget hearing, public hearing, and a discussion with Senator Tarr and Representatives Kastner and Shand is set for next Wednesday, March 5th, with the committee providing a final budget guidance to the administration by the end of that meeting. The final budget vote is March 12th to meet the certification deadline of March 15th. There will be ongoing discussions with the town representatives after, as they finish up their municipal budgets. At least 2 out of the 3 towns have to pass the budget for it to be approved. This is normally a single vote at each town meeting, but Newbury and Rowley Select Boards have publicly said they are considering an override vote. In those cases, there would need to be 2 yes votes in Rowley and Newbury for the town to pass it. One of the votes is at town meeting on the budget amount, and the second at the ballot box to raise real estate taxes so that the town has enough money to pay. If either vote fails, the whole municipal budget, including the district budget, is considered to have failed in that town. If the Triton budget does not pass in at least 2 of the 3-member towns, the school committee will need to reduce the school budget and send the new budget back to the towns for another round of votes. When reducing the budget, it has to be reduced for all towns. If one town passes it on the first round and second fail, the town that passes cannot choose to pay that higher amount to reduce impact on schools. They can choose to pass on future votes since they've already have an approved amount that's higher than what they will have to pay. The cycle of revising the budget and the town's voting on the new amounts continues until a budget is approved by at least 2 of the 3 towns voting yes. Triton does not have the authority to spend money after June 30th without an approved budget. If a budget is not approved by then, the state would create what's called a 1/12 budget for the district. With a set amount of funding the towns must pay month by month. The amount would likely be based on current year FY25 budget, and towns would be forced to pay while the voting cycle continues until the budget is passed locally. The reason why I'm saying this is 2 of our 3 towns are probably going to go for a override vote. And it's important for us to look at the budget to at least try and make, you want all 3 towns to vote for it. We're not always hoping to, but 2 will pass our budget. So I know it's a tough budget year, and we just have to make sure that we're keeping in mind what's going to happen if one or both of those overrides fail. Did you have a question?
I do have a question. Do we have a sense that whether, regardless of what the allocations are for each town, if they're going to need an override, regardless of what the budget is coming at them from the school, or if there's a sense of what the target is?
So I think we kind of do. So at the district communication meeting that was in Raleigh Town Hall, which I can't remember the date, Brian had modeled out the new assessments based on the current year's budget, so $0 increase, just applying the calculation to see how it would shift the shares that Raleigh, Newbury, and Salisbury had to pay. Rowley's would have gone up 247,000, right? I'm thinking. And select person, the select vice chair, Sherry David, in that meeting said that even at that, they would need an override.
What about Newbury?
Yeah, so Newbury said in their select board meeting that they would be going for an override estimated around 400,000. So their total, I don't know what their total
So that's still more than what their total was. That's still more than what their increase would have been.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not just the school budget that would necessitate an override in both of the towns.
Yeah. Paul.
Well, speaking for Newbury, I was told, talking with Alicia Greco, that the number based on the tentative budget that was voted last week would still require an override, and it is their intention to make the override specific to the school budget. Because of the belief that was given to me was that a school override is more likely to pass than if it's a general override.
So they're going to point the finger at the school.
I'll just say, I believe that again, not being a municipal official, I believe that just on the reports I pull, that they have to designate something. So I don't, when Paul's saying a general override, when I look at the override reports in there, it's an override for education, an override for public safety, an override, right? It's always got a reason that's sitting in the Mass DOR database for that override, like a purpose for it. So I don't want to doubt you, but I don't believe it can be general. I think they would have to say it's for it. Yeah.
Sorry.
So how do they come to terms with what is the cause for the override? Like, how do they decide what they're targeting as the actual account that they're delegating this override to?
I don't know that. My guess would be that it's an inordinately high cost that year, or probably one of the highest costs that they're looking at for that year, an increase. So like the ones that I typically see in there, like they're hiring, like Rowley was talking about, hiring full-time firefighters so that they can staff their fire department 24/7. That would be a public safety one, right? Their other costs could be increasing at the same time, but if that is a big jump for them, then they put it on something like that. Sometimes it's been like, I've seen, extra staff at town hall, or planning is a big one. Like they're hiring a couple new planners, and that'll be the override is sort of, I think the idea is, right, you put some money towards planning now, and it'll take sort of the burden off the taxpayers down the road if you can plan your town well. But like those are the things that I can pull the DOR reports if anybody wants them, but it literally sets out like the date that it was voted, the reason that it was voted, the date that it becomes effective, the amount, the actual vote numbers, like how many people voted for it, how many people voted against it. There's a whole set of data that's in that report, and you can pull whatever you need out of it.
And Newbury did look at those numbers as well and found that the school overrides did better in that vote total than overrides for other reasons.
So my next question for that, which is probably not for this committee, if the school portion of that, the override doesn't pass, but does the rest of the budget make it through and they just don't pay the school bill? Or how does that work?
So I can answer that one too. So basically what they typically do is in the town meeting article, they will tie the override passing to the municipal budget. So like the municipal budget, right, is a big number and it lists out all the departments, and schools is going to be one of the departments in it. And they're voting on that whole set as one article, right? So if it passes there, but then fails at the ballot box to raise taxes to fund that, the language basically causes the town meeting vote to fail, even if it passed. So the municipal budget is not passed at that point. So they're essentially going through the same cycle we're going through, but the difference is let's say that Salisbury passes the Triton budget, and one of the towns that's doing an override passes their budget and the override, right? But the other one fails the override. We now have a passed budget
the third town cannot reduce the school budget amount within their municipal budget. So the reductions would have to come in other departments, if that makes sense.
So can I just say, so there's the override decision, I think you're all clear, is not a you decision, right? That's an impact on the town. And there are different approaches. There is it has to be tied to something specific for the very reason Narissa just said, whereas it's that item in the warrant that fails if the override doesn't fail or doesn't pass. But there are towns that do it, the majority of towns, right, do it reactively. There are other towns, just to our south is Ipswich, they know every 5 or 6 years, they pass or put up for a structural override, and it usually passes. And that bucket is a big bucket. The bucket is more than they think they need next year. Generally, they plan on 5 years, and when they can squeak it out for a 6th year, it's a huge victory. That's not been the pattern in our towns. That's not a judgment. That's just not the pattern that has been established over the decades. I would say our towns are fairly override averse, and so I think it ends up being a very strategic discussion and plan to be able to figure out what the number is. And so I think that's what Newbury's trying to do, is decide. I've heard several different numbers when I talk to Tracy, and right, it's right sizing because we know our budget's not going down next year. So if the assessment's going to go in a certain direction, if you can right size that override, that doesn't mean we have a lot of cash to spend this year, right? That still doesn't necessarily do a lot for our budget, but it allows them to be able to pass a budget next year and the year after as well, and not just scrape by this year. I'll leave it at that.
Does anybody else have any questions on that? Now I'm going to hand it over to,
So before I just do a quick recap, I will say I did speak to the third town. We talked about Raleigh and Newbury, but not Salisbury. I did talk to Neil Harrington today. The number currently, and this is the document we're working from, is the tentative budget. This is what you approved on March 12th. This sets the high water mark for town assessments every year by promise, not really by statute. So that figure in the tentative budget for Salisbury is $717,000. Salisbury is further behind in their budget development process, so they're not as far along as we are. Neil's statement to me today was, if you're looking for a number that I can tell you unequivocally we can pass and we can support, it's lower than 717. And so I said, logical follow-up, what is that number? So that increase in their assessment is 4.51%, I believe, right? So you're looking at it, thank you. So generally, and I know we've had this discussion in towns, new growth, tax levy, 2.5%. Generally, he has said 2.5%, 3%, similar to where Tracy was saying, I don't remember when that was that a DCC meeting, where she said, the number's around 400, that's that kind of 3%, 2.5%, 3%. He said when it gets to 3.5, it gets tight, probably could swing something around 4 at 4.5. Could it be? Sure, miracles happen, but that is not something he could say right now wouldn't trigger them to be in override territory. That doesn't mean that they're going for an override. That just means that they've got a gap that they can't close between all their departments. So for him, he said if there was a number that he could say today, he would be able to say, yes, we will be able to include that in the budget and commit to making it work. It's a $650,000-ish increase, which would be about a 4% increase for their assessment, which would mean we would go, the increase to get them to about a 651. I took the liberty of adding $1,000. It would be about another 175,000 in cuts from the current tentative budget. So you're at 2.625. It would take it to 2.45. That would be the number that Salisbury, that Neil has conveyed. And I said, okay, I can speak for you publicly. He said, yes, that is the number we can say we can commit to. Right, he fully understands and respects the roles, right? He and I are the hired help. You're all the elected officials and the select boards. So we understand that there's a reality of intentions and that your job is a school committee, and he fully respects that. So that's not to say it has to be that number, but if we want to know, going back to the strategy about how we move forward to the process that Linda spoke about, the what if, it's been a long time since we've been in that what if territory, going past the final town meeting and not having a budget. So if we want at least to know at least one of our towns can support the budget, then it would have to be in that figure at this point. And like he said, as they go through the budget process, certainly numbers can change. Maybe Chapter 70 changes. There's momentum about regional transportation. There's momentum about Chapter 70 needs. I don't know that there's a gravy train coming this year, but in future years, maybe. So yeah, I'll leave it at that as far as where Salisbury's at. So I think, just to clarify timelines, right? So what Linda shared as far as process, assuming Newbury is indeed going for an override, right? Everything they've said, they haven't, I think they're actually they're meeting, right? Those votes are coming up from the select board in the coming weeks of whether they're going to have an override and what that number is. Everyone has indicated they are. Rowley has indicated strongly, again, not formally voted, strongly indicated they are. That means the soonest we will know anything is Tuesday, March 13th. So Newbury Town Meeting, did I say March?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes, you got 2 more months, which is worse. It'd be nice to clear things on March 13th. Sorry about that. So yes, May 13th. So Newbury's town meeting is here in the high school gym on Tuesday, April 29th. Rowley's is a week later, early May. Then the following week is that vote, which is the general election on Tuesday, May 13th. And then Salisbury holds their town meeting the following week. They hold their town meeting. They're the only town that holds it after the election. So if they were in, and they're not in override territory, but if they were moving toward an override, they would know the vote of the override or the outcome of the override before they have the town meeting. So if we're working with a number that Neil and the select board has confirmed is a number they would support from Salisbury, if one of the 2 overrides pass and it passes at town meeting, we would know on May 13th, or we would have relative confidence on May 13th that the following week it would be supported in Salisbury, and we would know at Salisbury's meeting. If both of them pass, if Rowley and Newbury both pass, both the budget and an override on May 13th, their town meetings will be done, their overrides will be happening on the 13th, then we would have a budget on the 13th. So the soonest, best case scenario is on the 13th, we would know. If not, we're waiting 1 more week to have it confirmed. If it doesn't pass, right, we're back to the drawing board. So we're back to, so if this number, whatever the final number is on that budget, doesn't pass, you then rework a budget and send it back to the towns. The towns have 45 days to hold a town meeting. And so certainly, it's clear that through this year in the process, we're going to be working through clarifying what those reductions would be, because we don't want to falsely reduce it too much now if there's an override on the table, right? Because then you're not putting a real number forward. But it's going to mean that we're going to be continuing this budget discussion through March, through April, and in May, we could be finding ourselves back at a space where we're actually coming back with reducing a budget and making further cuts. So, we'll just pause there in case there are any questions and comments.
I do have one question. You said we would, this is probably academic, but you said we would have to reduce at that point. If there was a clear indication that it was rejected as being too low, which, again, that's why this question is probably academic, because I don't see that happening. Is that by statute that we have to reduce, or just because that's the expected route that is most common?
I believe the statutory language is amend, not reduce.
Okay.
I don't know that you would have a way to know that the number was too low.
No, and that's why it's,
Similar to,
yeah.
right, we give the budgets to the towns, they don't get to decide a number, they're yes or no.
Right.
It's a yes, it's the number, or no, it's not. So if they say yes at the town meeting, it's the number. If the override passes, they've approved the budget, so I don't think there is a mechanism.
No, I mean, it's, like I said, it's an academic question in a world where CNN does exit polling at Newbury Elementary or something like that.
Yeah. Yes, yes. I don't believe we have exit or pre-polling available to us.
And just clarify, what I heard from Newbury is that their number for us without an override is something in the 400 vicinity. And we're at 586 in the tentative budget, so we would have to come, to get 2 towns out of the override, we're looking at several $100,000.
Yeah, and I think, yes, that is, I've heard that, and I've heard, right, this is not a new conversation for Newbury, right? This has been a couple years in the making. They've been talking about an override. There's been a push to say we need this override, right? That there's a belief that there's a certain population that would support it and move because it's incredibly low tax rate. For many reasons, there are a lot of people who believe an override is needed. So if that's the case, there's obviously a lot of people who don't, which will be the battle. But so this has been moving for several years. So yes, I've heard numbers 400, 300, 500, but I've also heard them say they think tonight now might be the time regardless because there are other factors changing. I know they had an unexpected influx for Whittier students this year from Newbury, that a couple 100,000 more that they didn't plan on. And again, I will say for towns, that's an incredible challenge because they do estimates early, and then it's not until the whole enrollment process is done that they get the real numbers. And so it was after the fact, it was higher than they budgeted. So their numbers continue to change as well. So I think similar to ours, we're waiting on Chapter 70. There's other factors that could make this better. They also have those wild cards, and I think they're dealing with the same healthcare like we are. You know, 1 million of ours is healthcare. So,
I get, my point really just our choices from where I'm sitting right now really seem to be to roughly stay where we are and say all 3 towns are probably heading towards an override, or go down enough to get 1 town out of that and say we have 2 towns that are probably going to need to pass an override for us to have a budget, because like that's roughly 600,000 or 700,000 in additional cuts we'd have to make to get down to where the second town comes out of that region. So that's sort of where I'm trying to clarify.
yeah, so I think I would safely say, yes, here, in the vicinity of here, puts 2 towns squarely and 1 town potentially in a challenging situation. We probably have to cut $1 million plus to get it to a point where we could have 2 towns say we're good without an override.
And if we did that, we don't know if they still would say that school is the reason why they can't make budget.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear what you said.
Yes, even if we cut our budget down in what we think would help them to not need the override, we don't know if they're going to adjust something else that would still require an override.
Okay, so I'm sorry I didn't pass this out before. It's been one of those days. So while that's being passed out, just to clarify when I get those. So again, as I mentioned, we're working off of, for our viewing audience, we're working off of the tentative budget that you approved on March 12th. I'm not going to go through that document, but that document includes line-by-line details of where the changes filter in through the various functions, through the schools. On page page 1 and 2 of that budget document, there is a summary change that includes all of the changes that are assumed in that budget over the current year's budget. So what you have in front of you tonight is a rethinking. The charge for me tonight was to come back with thinking around what would where would the reductions be if we're going to reduce to get to that 2.625? So in speaking with the chair, we were talking through, especially with the strategy around an override. It is, I know principals are having conversations with people today, school councils were having discussions about budgets today. This puts the angst, right? When we start talking, when we specifically identify people, it changes the tone. And unfortunately, it's a tone felt in a lot of districts right now. You're reading the paper about Georgetown and Amesbury and Tri-Town. All three towns are going for an override, right? So this is kind of the nature of being in public education right now, unfortunately. So what you have in front of you tonight is a rethinking of everything we've given you so far. Anything that is changed is included, it's highlighted with a yellow tag. So the front page, in those changes, nothing has changed. Largely, that's the school by school. We are putting a new teacher. It's one less teacher at Salisbury, but that's strictly because of attrition, because of existing class that's graduating out of sixth grade. There's an extra class. We're moving that over to Newbury to make what is a currently very large kindergarten into 4 sections rather than 3. Currently 22 and 21 before any move-ins for first grade, so that is still included. And so on that front page, you see the individual information by each school. We're including not a lot of new positions, but we are increasing all of the materials and supplies. We had that discussion at length about the reality is all of the costs are going up, and they're needed. And if they're not being paid for by the district, unfortunately, teachers will always be those kind of people and are going to go spend it out of their pocket. So, so supplies are increased as needed. We did include those 2, a special ed teacher that was in a grant, as well as a ELIA, or a multilingual IA over at Salisbury, and I'll talk about that on the second page. We did also include the speech and language therapist, and then it does include a new, bringing a BCBA into a full, an RBT into a full BCBA position, and that is to address the needs in programs, is absolutely a must-do. So on the other side, as I said, those in bold are what we have confirmed at this point. So going down the page there, as far as things that have changed, there was a position with creating a director of operations that is rethought here. Ideally, we've talked about the role of transportation. We won't ask Brian to comment on that. But rather than taking transportation away from the director of finance and operations, here, this assumes keeping that intact with the director of finance and operations. What this actually does is takes our current facilities manager and makes them an operations manager. So John has taken on safety planning this year, and so he would take that on fully, and then also be, as well as facilities planning, be another resource for the director of finance and operations. So would be involved in help with transportation, but wouldn't solely be responsible. So that would be a salary correction, but not a large one. And what this assumes then is adding a assistant facilities manager. As I spoke to you earlier tonight about things that are popping up, there's been a lot we've learned since John has taken the helm, and he's phenomenal. And there's a lot of good work that's been done to streamline and to organize and to put preventative maintenance and all those plans into a trackable system. And so this actually adds an assistant facilities manager to work with him, because we need more of that. As we move towards a project here, we need to make sure that we're able to keep and maintain and have a plan so that the decisions that were made on this campus when this was renovated, there are decisions I question, but there's also things that we haven't funded since that could have prolonged some life. So as we go through that whole entire facilities process, we need to be more proactive with our elementary schools, even though the towns own them, making sure we're, pun intended, driving that bus to make sure that we're planning for and strategically setting that out. So that is a rethinking of that, so that's back in. I did add in that market correction. It's largely for school administrative office staff, both admin support as well as administrators and some district administrators. Again, I think as we're talking about decisions like Brian's replacement is going to have to do transportation, we have to make sure we are paying market rates to make sure we're able to keep people in position. So, so that is back in. The community resource liaison, actually, in talking with Dr. Bates, this does assume, this doesn't change, but it assumed originally the reduction of the wellness coordinator. And in doing that, one of the, there are some pieces of that Jasenia, who is our community resource liaison, needs to pick up to keep some momentum on certain things that can't be absorbed elsewhere. So this adds back in those additional 10 hours a week for our community resource liaison. And then you can see we had another change in our retirement and insurances. That is the 16.18% renewal on our medical, and dental is down a little lower. So that's reflective of that increase. We should mention, last year there was a discussion about shifting medical for food services employees over to food services. So last year we got to a roughly 50-50 split, so that 50% of all plans were funded through the district and 50% were funded through the revolving account. This assumes it's about $55,000 more to keep it at that 50-50 split. So this number, even though it went up, is inclusive of that savings, as well as the increases that we continue to talk about. The other things remain unchanged. Again, the savings that we had previously identified is the elimination of the wellness coordinator. There is a full FTE, that's sections at the high school that have been unfilled and is removed. Some out-of-district savings for a student's situation that changed. There's a placeholder here for healthcare savings through negotiations of $300,000. We're continuing to work on that. PNN is meeting again on Friday morning. As we go forward, if that target, that's a pretty aggressive target, I will say that, but anything that isn't achieved there would have to be added to the to-be-determined bucket. And similarly, the circuit breaker is a new revenue. That is transportation within the circuit breaker calculation. Was never fully funded out of Student Opportunity Act. Last year was 57%, it's 44% this year. We now have legislators who understand that circuit breaker is not fully funded, and so there is a commitment to fully fund that next year. Could be this year too, which would give us some additional revenue, which we could use a little buffer. But we're going to assume that for next year because there certainly seems to be momentum around that. So no change on those are as assumed. Other cuts that we're going to put on the table now as clear, we're ready to say we can commit to these. That EL, the multilingual assistant at Salisbury that is there and currently funded out of a grant. We currently have 64, I believe is the number, Shannon, 60, mid-60s total students receiving EL services. 30 of them are at Salisbury Elementary. So because of changes in caseloads in other schools, we're actually able to repurpose, that's not true, reassign licensed EL teachers over to cover those services at Salisbury Elementary. So the individual who is providing those services now as an IA is a phenomenal IA for many reasons. And so we fully expect we will keep her because we know of promised retirements and things like that. So we will likely keep her in the district and hopefully at Salisbury, but it would be not in that role. So that is a reduction, but again, that's not because we're cutting services. It's because we're able, there are changes that have happened that allow us to make that shift. Similarly, you can see here a savings of $197,000 This is, we're going to call this opportunistic savings. So at the moment, you know there's an age span with which we can have students in a particular program receiving special education services. At the moment, the way the populations are at the middle school and the high school, we have 2 retirees that would not be replaced, and we're able to combine the TLC program at the middle school and high school, and it was the Essentials program at the middle school and the high school. That works now. For next year, the age span allows that to work, so there's not too much of a gap. The following year, we could be in a situation where we would need to add one of those teachers back because we then have that age span that's too much. So this could be long-term, right? There's also a pretty good population coming up in the 27, 28 school year from Newbury that would likely make this go in the other direction. Does it need to be 2 people restored or maybe just 1? To be determined. But for next year, we're confident putting this on paper that, again, no denial of services, no change in services, no reduction, elimination, or degradation of services, just it works for next year with the clear understanding that everyone's clear that this could be a 1-year savings that would have to be reversed. So that leaves another $257,000 to be cut. Things that I'm not going to put on paper yet for the aforementioned angst that it causes. But just some of the things that we've talked about. There is a curriculum adoption for science that we could delay, right? Is that 1 year? It would save $30,000.
Yeah, the Science, Technology, and Engineering Committee decided they want to explore some resources rather than adopting the newest edition of Inspire Science. So I had set aside funds for that in the budget proposal that we won't be needing.
So that just takes away that option if that were to come up mid-year or whatever. So again, not ready to say we definitely don't want to do that, but that's something we talked about. Reducing late runs, late buses, we've talked about that. It's about 90,000 all in. This year it's 2 buses per town. We were budgeting them at 2 days per week. We actually are running 1 bus per town 3 days a week with the same money. So we could cut that. You could say 40, 30, 50, depending on how we run them. Again, that targets a very specific population of kids who do take advantage of that, kids who need it, and the kids who do need to be here after school. We could not contribute to the OPEB. Not a fan of that, but it's something that is not an absolute must. It is a wise choice. We currently have 2 bus runs that we have budgeted, that we've spent a lot of time talking about transportation. I don't need to rehash this. We have 21 funded, 19 running. We've told NRT we want 21 because it's the right number. We need 1 more in Salisbury and 1 more in Rowley. We could cut those out. I don't want to, right? I mean, I think ultimately when we have the drivers available, the right decision to make sure that buses are running on time and otherwise is to have those routes, but they're out there. And then from there, right, we looked through their IAs, some IAs we could collapse and support. There's no way I can say that there's no way we could take out any instructional assistance right now without impacting support. There's some that we've identified that would be less impactful, but beyond that, we kind of the 4 areas, or for each of the schools, if we're talking about big ticket items that we need to reduce, at the elementary, if we're talking class size, there are some classes that have a section of 4, that reducing them to sections of 3 would put them from the kind of mid-upper teens to the low 20s. That would certainly be a place we would have to look. At the middle school, it was really to keep teams in play. We will have an aligned schedule, just to clarify that. There will be an aligned schedule that's going to allow us to provide some more opportunity sharing staff between the middle school, high schools, particularly with the performing arts. If you do away to have teams, you really need 2 teachers per subject, per grade level. Even though they don't operate fully as teams, you need that in order to have that team structure. That's on the table. Really, kind of the next place that Al really has to go would be There are sections we could eliminate, but it would eliminate teams. And it would be much more like a high school structure where rather than 4 math teachers, you would have 3, and 3 caseload-wise, it makes sense, but it wouldn't be 7th grade team and an 8th grade team, it would just be math teachers. So it goes to more of the departmental structure rather than the team structure. At the high school, it would end up being, there would certainly be some larger core classes, and there would be some of the breadth of programming, some of the electives that we're able to offer, that we would likely, choose to have more reasonable core classes and maybe not run an elective that has been, even if it's well subscribed. So those are decisions as the course, that course selection process is just rolling out now. We have a much clearer sense of where the need is, where the interest is. And then the only thing we came up with, so really, the bottom line there is it's classroom teachers. We don't believe that the interventionists, the math reading specialists at the, elementary, middle school level are a place that we could look. And then at the, for special educators, other than that collapsing of those, the programs at the middle school and the high school, there really aren't special educators where we can look and say, yes, we can deliver the same high-quality services by reducing those numbers. So that leaves classroom instructors. So that would be how it would impact each of the kind of grade levels. And then the one other thing we've talked about is at the elementary school, we have art, music, PE, and library as the specials. So specials, not specialists, interventionists. We could reduce, right? So they are all of those specialists. Music, we couldn't actually because they're doing both general music and involved in instrumental lessons. But for both library, art, and PE, those teachers end up having free sections. Several of our special teachers are former classroom teachers, and so during those open sections, they're providing interventions, they're in classrooms, right? So they're doing meaningful things. Sometimes it's providing a coverage for something that we don't otherwise have a substitute for. And so they are well used and stretched across the buildings, but it is an area, again, if we're talking about going to class sizes and such, it's another area that we talked about with the principals. It would largely be, student impact would be small, because students would continue to have the same schedule, the impact for the specials, right, for art, for library, for PE. There would certainly be an impact on the interventions that we're able to provide and support with those teachers. And then there's certainly a logistical chaos that creates for not having those people available to provide coverage within the building for any given reason, as well as for those 9 educators who would be working in multiple buildings. So they would be in different buildings, different days. Is it doable? Of course it is, but it's a challenge. It's been many years. We actually had that for a while and moved away from that because it is problematic. But so those are, right, some, again, depending on what that number is that you set and charge me with cutting towards, those are the areas, some iteration of those, where we would be looking, depending on the amount of cuts. So when we're talking about individuals, generally we have to talk about, there could be salary savings, but then we have to make some assumptions about unemployment. So if you're setting aside 40% for unemployment, whereas a pay-as-you-go, not a fully insured, if you set aside 40% of a $100,000 salary and save $60,000, takes a whole lot longer to get to $300,000 or $250,000 than it does if it was just a few other people. So that is my current thinking of how we would make the reductions if required.
A question on the essentials and TLC combinations. What are the caseloads for those educators going to look like if we're collapsing those programs?
We'll look to Shannon for that. Do you have I know you all met.
The caseloads will range between, let's see, for essentials, it would be, we have 2 essentials teachers right now, so we'd have 2 programs, so it would be between maybe for each teacher, like 7 to 9 kids. And then for the TLC, we'd have 1 teacher, and that is, it would be about, if I'm looking at it right, it would be about 9 students. And they have IAs in both programs. So their caseloads won't change too much.
Okay. Again, just going back to, hence why it could potentially be a one-year solution, because it's just becomes a numbers exercise at this point.
Could it potentially be a half-year solution if someone moves in?
Say that one more time?
Could it potentially wind up not even serving us the full year if someone moves in that throws off that age range?
It could, yeah, absolutely. And I think we'd have to address that like we did with remember the family that moved in and we were getting a $540,000 bill. So, yes, so that is, right, that will forever be. You remember during COVID, we got ourselves back to financial health and had a year's worth of circuit breakers sitting there, and we're doing what the program was intended to do to address those types of situations. We have stabilization, we have a little bit of E&D. We don't have a lot of other balances at this point. So it certainly leaves us, right, we go back as principals, and we've spent a lot of time talking through how we do this and, lead in these times. You go back to the 2008, 2009 years, and those who remember that or were here, it was just years of this. Mid-year cuts, and when there isn't an ability to have reserves, something like that is a mid-year cut. And when you're making a mid-year cut, you only save half of what you would have saved otherwise.
I hate to ask this, but I don't want to miss any of the conversation. Can we take like a 5-minute break? So that I can go to the bathroom and come back without missing the conversation? No bathroom.
I just wanted to note, or ask a question as well. The out-of-district tuitions, does that mean they've graduated out of that program? Yeah.
So that was, we had some students who did age out, they were in a residential program. We have brought students back. We have kept students in, so different. This on, sorry. So, thanks for reminding me. So that savings in out-of-district as a result of students aging out because they were in residentials. We've also worked to bring students back into our district from outside the district, keeping students in the district and not sending them out. So we have savings in those areas because of that. Our district programs, as we've built them up, we've been able to bring some kids back into them.
Right. So I just think that's important to note so that when Brian says we're collapsing and it depends on how many students are in that, you may have to increase or adjust things. And that is the reason for that, because your team has been spending so much time trying to make sure our students do stay here. And as you see with that number, not having our students in district, that number can get pretty high pretty quickly.
Very quickly, yeah. So we appreciate that. It's definitely, we have to support those programs to keep the kids in because that can go up quickly.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at this, and the thing that I'm most struck by is nothing can go wrong. The roof cannot leak. We cannot have extra teachers getting sick. Like, nothing can go wrong. Please forgive me, I have to ask this. Our rationale in cutting was to avoid overrides. We didn't do that. I no longer see a rationale for cutting. If we're going to go for an override, regardless, and if Newbury in particular is going to be pointing that override at us, I'm, in experiencing past overrides, I'm going to vote for it. I'm the kind of person who's going to vote for it, and I think there are people who are going to vote for it. They're not going to ask what the number is, they're going to look at the program. And there are people who are not going to vote for it, they're not going to ask what the number is, they just are not going to vote for it. I don't think the number matters all that much. And I know that we have not in the past gone up from a tentative budget, but this is extreme. And it doesn't get us that one goal. And it's going to take, clawing this back is not going to happen until the point where there are none of us sitting at this table. And that's, I think going to that level services budget, if there's going to be overrides anyway, is the only way I can see proceeding. Because if we use the one override we get for this, we get nothing else.
Clarifying question on that. So what I'm hearing you saying is people are either yes or no. There's no, it's, $83 on your tax bill versus $383 on your tax bill. You don't think there's any sensitivity there? I have no idea what the numbers are. I'm making those up. Those are like.
No, I don't think there is. I cannot think of a time when numbers as an argument carried the day particularly in Newbury. The amount of times that people voted against numbers that were clear simply because of their position. The number of times we could have saved money but shot ourselves in the foot because the numbers didn't matter. It was about the principle. I just don't see the numbers mattering. I could not tell you a number of an override I've voted for.
I mean, I can only speak for Raleigh, but I think the numbers matter. I heard a lot about that when we were working on the Pine Grove project. So I guess definitely could vary town by town, but I'm not sure that that's a blanket statement. You know, I think a lot of people said, I want to support this, but I can't pass because it's too much on my budget, or I can't pass this number. I think
different towns.
yeah, different towns.
Is there anybody else that has a comment or concern?
I mean, I don't want to be the one to say this, right? But I think moving to a point where Salisbury would have to be an override, it puts a lot of additional risk into this process, a lot of additional risk in my mind. And I think it also, I heard Neil say, right? I think it probably wasn't a warning, right? But it was if you have an override now, you're probably not going to pass one down the road. I mean, talking about, town by town, I don't know if he meant that, like Salisbury alone or as a general warning, but I feel like for Salisbury at least, he knows Salisbury well, and I'd be concerned about losing both if we push Salisbury to an override now. And I get it's their decision, right, on whether they override and what they override for. It's just.
Just to make sure that I didn't place words in Neil's mouth. So I believe the words he said, to make sure I'm conveying clearly, was a number he can confidently say he would support and can support in the budget is 650, 717. That might mean that it's just a no vote, right? So I think there's a lot of options that don't include an override where they just say they can't fit it in the vote, but they also, I've not heard anyone in Salisbury talking about an override. So I don't want to say that automatically if it kicks it to an override, just to make sure I'm not misrepresenting Neil. But it's certainly not a sure thing if we're not working with that number.
So the other option would be that they would have to put our number forward, but they would recommend against it. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Right, it would have to be an unbalanced budget that I would imagine they would say they don't support, which is also not a good thing.
Yeah. I appreciate that clarification because I didn't get that originally.
Sorry, I agree with what Brian said. Salisbury hasn't spoken of an override. They're largely in favor of supporting the Triton budget as much as they can. As new information comes in, they are not as far down. So even getting that number from Neil is actually great because they have a lot more coming at them that hasn't been identified yet. But I have not heard anyone discuss an override. But they do in town meeting, I will say, they do that recommendation, and then into like a no vote, which is something we'd like to avoid. Because it does set a tone that then if we do have to go for an override, people do go back to that original no vote and kind of stick to it. I don't know if that happens in other towns, but that's very big in Salisbury.
Yeah, I think it's a good point because it's right, because it could be an override, right? That is where they end up. That is a decision that they make. It wouldn't automatically. I think that's why I just want to make sure I may not have been clear on that, so.
What is the number? It would have to be 2.45 for it to be palatable for Salisbury, correct?
Yeah, so that additional undesignated, the additional undesignated cuts would be 432, 651.
Additional or total?
Total. So the 257, put your glasses on, Brian. 257, 651 becomes 432, 651.
And those cuts would come from what you had.
So some combination of, right, we can make a combination of late buses and there's certainly areas, like if we're talking about classing or reducing classroom teachers, then we would say for definitively, we're gonna delay that science thing, right? So if I'm measuring that decision, and I think I can speak for Anna, if we're measuring that against a classroom teacher, then yes, that would be the first 30,000 to go. Save 30, 40,000 in reducing some late buses, right? So we can chip away at it, but we would absolutely be at classroom teachers.
And that would be coupled with the to be determined cut, so that would be, we're still looking at another 257, 651 on top of the 432, 651.
No,
The
that,
257 becomes 432. So it's 175 more.
so we have to give Brian direction.
So I will just say this, so for tonight, the need is, your public hearing is a week from tonight. I need to communicate out with families and the public and give them some specifics about what they're hearing, you know, what you're hearing on. The tentative budget with undesignated cuts, this with undesignated cuts. I feel like I need to give some clarity about what that would mean. I don't want to, again, outside of the ones we've identified where you can pick people out that we're sure about, I'm not going to name specific positions, but I feel like I need to give some clarity around what those additional cuts. If it's 257, it would look different than if it was 432, as far as that kind of narrative of what we're talking about. So I think that's, just to be clear, that's what the guidance that's needed tonight is, where's the committee leaning towards? Do you feel like the 2.45 is the right number or the 2.625?
So, two things is that, at least in terms of Newbury, I tend to agree with Paul, that if we are at 2.625 and Newbury needs to pass an override versus we're at 2.45 and Newbury needs to pass an override, I don't think that's going to make a difference in whether it passes in Newbury or not. I don't think, like, to your point, $83 versus $383 makes a difference, but $83 versus $142 is probably not a difference maker in enough people's minds to change that vote. In terms of the, you know, those unspecified cuts, I'm just going to say that, you know, people will tie things together as much as they can to make it work, but there needs to be people there to do it. And so the things like the late buses and the curriculum changes are patchable, but an increased in a elementary classroom from 16 to 23 is probably not to the same. So, you know, and then if class sizes are going up, my perspective on it is usually older is better, because the younger the student is, the more they need the direct face-to-face in order to do the learning.
Sorry, another clarifying question. I used the big number gap because Paul was talking about going back to the full. You're just talking about the difference between the, right? Am I just understanding you right?
I mean, I think I'm in agreement with Paul that these cuts are big cuts. I look at that wellness coordinator cut and say that that is a position that was hopefully doing good work, you know, and that work was hopefully going to pay large dividends down the line, and now we're saying no. And that's, not coming back in the time my elementary age children are going to be in the schools. And so I would like to say we should move back towards the level services, but I don't think that budget is realistic to pass 2 out of 3 overrides.
Does anybody else have any thoughts? I agree with Paul that I don't think we could go to the level service budget because I don't believe that that is feasible for our 3 towns, as much as we would like it to be there. I'm worried about causing Rowley and Newbury to have to go for a budget, for an override, which we already know they are, but then to ignore what Salisbury has said and go to a town meeting and have them say, we don't support this. Then we wind up with 3 towns that possibly can't pass the override, pass their votes. So I am leaning more towards what Salisbury has asked.
I agree with Linda largely. I don't know if we could even come close to getting where Newbury and Rowley need us to be to stop those override situations. We can, albeit it is ugly, get to a place where we meet at least one of our 3 towns' needs. And I know it's a struggle to say that because we want to provide services and everything for our students, but we are regional and we have to look at what this does to our 3 towns. And I don't know, I don't speak for Rowley, I don't speak for Newbury, and I don't, but from what I've heard in DCC and what was said, I don't think we could get there and have a school system functioning. Salisbury's ask is tough, but we could get close to that and still be able to provide services to our students and keep class sizes manageable in the younger grades. So I would support going and trying to get as close to that 432.65 in to be determined cuts. And at least try to provide something for one of our towns to be able to avoid an override.
Is there anybody else that would like to voice their opinion?
Can I ask a question about feedback about a specific proposed or discussed cut? Getting rid of the 2 additional routes, the one in Rowley, one in Salisbury. Big if, there's a lot of factors that have the potential to be better in the new contract with daily, fees and penalties. There's a lot more motivation for them to be on time, have backup drivers, right? So we anticipate it will be better. There's a new parent app rolled out that will be better for communication. The buses are still very full in Salisbury and Rowley. It's an easy cut, right? Because it's we don't have it right now, but I worry about that for the future. So I guess my question is, what are folks thought about that savings? About 155,000, 160?
But we're also going to lose the reimbursement as well.
We already do.
So yes, so we would lose what do we lose? We lose like 20% of our ridership is inside of 1.5 miles that we don't get reimbursed for, so it's not a straight 75, 85%. But yes, we wouldn't be reimbursed on that either. We're not now, but.
And we haven't been for a few years.
For those 2 buses, yes. Yeah. Yeah, we had 4 more pre-COVID.
How much more of a guarantee do we have that when someone calls out sick, that there still is going to be somebody to cover a route instead of what's been happening? Because now we're saying we need 21.
So what we've said is the priority is subs, having extra drivers so that we don't do any collapsing when there is an absence, a call-out. That's our priority, first and foremost, to make sure that the runs that are there run. And secondarily to that, we would like to get back to 21 with substitutes, because that's the right number for the right number of kids on a bus, not oversubscribed. Because I do think there are a lot of families that aren't putting their kids on the buses because it isn't a reliable service. So when those families do come out and they want to use the buses again because they are performing on time, I worry about not having that capacity, because we can't deny busing, right? We would have to add that if there's a need and we're not able to subscribe. So I feel like it's an easy one to target, but it's loaded. So.
Is it a certain route that's not being run? So, okay,
It's reworked for
it's
19.
reworked, and,
So all of Salisbury would be reworked with one more.
yeah,
All of Rowley would be reworked with one more.
and there's no way to rework the 19 runs to kind of offset that.
So they're more
Numbers.
balanced now.
Yeah, so that's my
It's just
question.
when there's a call out, they get combined. So last year, so Kyle's last year was when they were planned, right? And then we didn't have them, so they were routed for 21, and we were just missing 2 runs, so that was the chaos. This year, they got rerouted for the 19, which it's not ideal by any stretch, because they're very, very full, but they're at least more balanced.
Okay.
And you can see the number, like you're talking about like kids coming back to riding buses, but I would assume that you're planning though for those kids who you can see, or, I mean, so I'm a little confused when you say about like if the system gets better about more people riding the buses.
So
because-
when they're routed, some of those buses are routed for 80, 85 kids, because we know a bunch aren't coming. Either they're driving, they're a senior, right, so there's some obvious ones, but then they tend to go even lower. So if it goes back towards their 77 passenger buses, we've talked about this, but that's 3 to a seat, except for that fun seat in the back. Right, unless you're a kindergartner, 3 to a seat isn't safe. So when you get 3 high school boys, good luck putting 3 in a seat. So they're really 55s is what they are, comfortably 2 to a seat. So it would probably be a year out, right? So we'd probably be okay next year, because I'm sure parents who have sworn off buses are not going to be convinced mid-year. But if after a year that's going well, they might be like, all right, we're going to do that again. So we'd have to relearn the assumptions we make and the kind of natural attrition that wouldn't happen.
At that point, you're talking about kids who have not ridden the buses in 4 years, and other than the low elementary kids, were low elementary kids when they rode the bus. It's an entirely different story, and I don't think you're necessarily talking about saying, oh, the buses haven't worked or been there for 3 years, saying, oh, maybe we'll try it. It's a small population that would be coming back but had been doing it, I think. I mean, my tendency is to say, the buses have been a disaster, and I'd like to keep those routes just to make them less of a disaster. But on the other hand, if it's $150,000 of bus routes versus $150,000 of classroom teachers, I'm choosing the classroom teachers.
And you're not even sure that you're going to get those 2 runs back.
So it
And
would
you're not even,
There's no.
there's no guarantee you
guarantee.
get them back.
It's a guarantee about being on time? Nope. Guarantee of call-outs? Nope. So yes, absolutely. It could be 5 more years before they can find the drivers. So,
So I agree with Paul that that's $150,000 that has been sitting there already.
yes, it has, and to the members of the Finance Committee. You talk about that monthly, there's those little buffers that are what will likely get us to the finish line this year. So
So if we
Gentlemen,
lose that buffer, because that money is now being allocated to something else that's an emergency, we're now cutting the buffer that we have too if we cut those buses.
absolutely, yes. Right, so we don't budget any fluff, right, in this budget. You know every line, every amount. That's one line that for the last few years, we've carried the buses with the full intention of wanting them, and have told NRT that. But on the other side of that, we've been somewhat thankful because it's helped balance off other lines that have gone through the roof, largely maintenance, repairs and all that. So back to Paul's point, right, leaves no wiggle room whatsoever. So if we have to cut 200,000, if we had to cut 500,000 mid-year, we're actually cutting $1 million because you're only going to get a half a year's worth of savings. So if we know we're going to come up for $500,000 shy at the end of the year, we've got to cut $1 million worth of staff. So mid-year cuts are awful. There's no good scenario where mid-year cuts, moving towards anything that would create the possibility of mid-year cuts. It's awful for the kids first and foremost on up. So.
So our task tonight is to decide which number we're going with for Brian to make a decision. We've heard from a few members.
You can go person by person, or is,
I mean, you've got options, right? If you want to push people to, or you can say the people who have spoken are the ones that have strong opinions. I mean, you got
So the number
got
is
different.
2.625 or 2.45, right?
I would say if I was summarizing, what I've heard around the table is that there's, right, there's a suggestion that the level services budget, call it roughly 3.5. There's interest in that. I've heard concern from the rest of the table. So then what I've been hearing is it the 2.625 or the 2.45 or somewhere between that you would like? And again, we're not coming back with a reworked budget for next week. This is really about the messaging, and I will clear this with the chair before this goes out, kind of how this is going out, to say, and show up, families, this is what we're hearing or holding a hearing on, is this tentative budget. And further to that, the committee believes they're going to have to cut another 175 if it's the 2.45. Or they're sticking with that, but there's a lot of uncertainty as we move towards the rest of this budget process.
So I guess I will start with you, Erin. You're the end of the table. Paul was smart, he moved down here now.
She said you were smart because you moved down here now. You're not at the end of the table and going first anymore.
So we're in this terrible pattern that we're not even making it to level funding for multiple years, which means we're never going to get back what we're cutting every year to even trying to make it even. And it's incredibly disappointing and hard for me to fathom that we would have to cut more. I do have a question before I give you like the utmost number. If we're looking at the 432,651, you would be outlining what would have to potentially be cut so that when we go into conversations and have the public hearing for them to see what that would look like, but that's not what we're voting on as the final presentation, or is that what we're voting on for the final presentation?
So you're voting a final, I believe what Linda's asking is what do you want to target for next week for conversation purposes? The following week, you'll approve a final budget. And we can have the discussion about whether those cuts are identified for the final budget. The intention was not to come with a list because we have to put the information out ahead of time for the public hearing. So it would be capturing the tentative budget and any iterations from tonight's discussion that will capture in a message tomorrow or Friday. And then the final budget, it may have, right, so I guess then it's a discussion next week of whether that final budget articulates, and is it cutting down to the 432, to the 230, those are my numbers, 257, or something in between. We can determine whether or not that would be your charge. So next week, it's the public hearing, and then our local legislators, or is it backwards? Yeah, public hearing, legislators, and then you're going to deliberate. So it's a long one, because that's you're giving me the final guidance of what you want to include in the final budget. The final budget can include to be determined cuts.
The thing is we have to put something out for the public hearing for next week. So we have to know the direction that the committee would like to go. Our legislators will hopefully be here next week, depending on if they have a session. And we can have this discussion with them as well.
So 2.55 and split the middle, because we're already cutting a lot. We're getting rid of things that we spent an awful lot of time trying to get in place. I want to be respectful of the communities, and I understand the impact and the weight of this in the communities and what that means. But I also want to stay true to making sure that we have our educators in place and we have what we need for the students to be able to be successful. So I'm going to say split the difference.
It's okay.
Sorry, I'm doing it right now.
I understand what you're saying, if that's still a no in Salisbury, potentially, high potential.
And again, we don't know if it's a no in Salisbury, but we're looking at the next starting point, and I'm afraid if we go too far that we're going to hang our hats on, well, you agreed to cutting it down to 2.45, even if this group here thinks that it should be a little bit more than that when we look at what actually has to be cut.
But if it doesn't gain you anything, why cut anything at all? I guess that's where I've just got a block that I'm trying to understand, is because, like, it doesn't really change the scenario.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So I think if we take Paul Mayette's approach, which I think is what you're saying right now, I don't think that makes us a willing partner with all the communities to try to get this done, because if we just stand back and say, we're not going to cut it all because you have to do an override.
Oh, no. Erin was suggesting, so that the two numbers that were here were the 2.625 and the 2.45. So she was suggesting 2.55, which is in between. So, I mean, the reason that 2.45 was out there was because Salisbury said that they believed that was the number that they could come in and say, yes, we would recommend this to the townspeople for approval. So I was just trying to understand where Erin's brain was in saying we want to cut from the 2.625, but not to the point where Salisbury could recommend it.
So we still don't know what Salisbury's exact number is. He said he could confidently say the 2.45. He didn't know if he could go higher than that. Why are we cutting it more if they can actually do it without the information?
Well, Brian spoke to Neil.
Yeah, I
Right,
mean,
but if I'm understanding how you're relaying the conversation to us, it wasn't a guarantee that they were going to need an override if we left it where it was. Is that correct?
correct. So
Can you just repeat what he said again, if you don't
yeah,
mind?
so his conversation was, or his statement, and I wish I was a therapist and could do it word for word. His statement was about it was a longer conversation about where we're at with the budget. Fully clear that we have, Raleigh has been very clear from the get-go there, moving toward an override. Newbury has, all systems seem to be go for an override. And having one town that, as we're finalizing a budget, that we could say, one town we know our number will work in. And so his message was, the number I can tell you absolutely we can support is about 4%, which is 650. So I went to 651 when I was rounding numbers. He didn't say we absolutely can't support 717, which is the 2.625. He just said, we're too early in the process. I don't know. So it could be a no, right? It could be a no that they're not able to support that in the budget. I suppose, again, I've not heard anyone in Salisbury talk about an override. They could move toward an override. Or it could that they could find a way to make it work. But he said, I can't commit to that right now. So if it's something that you're looking to commit for, the sure thing is 650 is the 2.45. So I guess to the point you were making, Narissa, $50,000 may make a difference for them. I don't know. Like he said, he just doesn't have the information now. He knows 717 is going to be a stretch. Because I think they're looking at a lot of growth in years 27 and beyond that's coming online. So they think they'll actually be better kind of beyond 26 in their projections and their development planning. So they're doing this with all their departments to try and when you do that with a lot of different departments, those $50,000, $75,000 add up quick.
My concern, could the inverse also be true? So
Say
right
that
now,
one more time.
So right now, he's saying, like, I'm comfortable here, I can say yes here, but as he gets more information, is there a possibility that he could say, oops, like something came in, and now I have to be at a lower number? I'm just going from both sides.
Yeah, I
So-
guess I would say-
So where we're at, he's saying, like, look, I will do my, Neil is pretty straightforward and conservative. I think that's kind of his communication style. So when he says, and this is how I'm taking it, I wasn't in the conversation, I don't know. But looking at Neil in the past and how he handles this budget, the number he generally gives with the information he has is conservative. And he will often do his best, and the town of Salisbury will do their best to stick with that number, even if something down the pike hits them hard, they will try to honor kind of things that they say earlier in the conversation. And that's been kind of past practice.
Right.
So my concern would be not holding them to that and not kind of taking their past communication style into account and saying like, yeah, let's do 2.55, and then having something hit them and then being kind of like, well, I already told you, like, conservatively, this is where I was. But not having Neil here and we're all kind of just going off of, we're speculating, we're going off of kind of past budget cycles, where in the past 4 or 5 years, I can honestly say Neil has stayed pretty true to the numbers he's put out, and even when Salisbury has taken a hit somewhere else.
And it's similar to when Tracy shared that the number's around 400,000, but that doesn't mean they couldn't make it work a little more than that. And obviously that's changed, right? Because all of other things have increased. So the 650 is not the comfort point. That's the kind of stretch, at least what he shared with me. So again, it was that 2.5%, 3%, very confident, 3.5%. Still, we can make it work above 3.5%. So you go to 4%, that's the 650. Then he's saying, I will commit to that. But I think they're very much what you were saying, Caitlin, that there's a risk there, that it's not a comfortable point, but they will commit to that. Beyond that, they just can't commit to it.
So are you staying with the 455, 255? Kelly?
I'm going to first say this is really tough for my first time being at
Right.
this, but it is
Welcome.
hearing you in like about, you speak about the past, you know, I've had to really take that into account because unfortunately, you know, I come here as an educator too, and this makes me want to cry when I look, I'm serious, it does. I feel for just everything that's, but when I hear what you said, like about how Salisbury, you know, again, we're, you know, we've got 3 big districts and we've got to think about everyone, all these towns coming together. I think it's that whole thing where we're in this together and we've got to think about everyone. That I really have to say I'm swayed with what you've been saying about Salisbury and about, you know, giving them a number and you know, if it means that they can get it to work, I have to, like I said, it kills me to say this, but I would say the 2.45.
Caitlin?
I would say I don't like it, but in going for where our 3 towns and 2 of them, you know, all 3 are in a difficult space, and one of us has given a number that in the past they've kind of committed to those numbers, and the other 2 are looking at overrides that are beyond our control. Not much that we do will shift their need for that. I will say that 2.45 and kind of working with the town that we can work with, and hopefully in the future we get to the point where we're not just looking at one town that we can work with, but multiple towns that we can work with. It's just this year, it seems Salisbury's provided a number to avoid an override that I may not like the cuts that we're looking at or the number, but you know, the health of our communities matter, and I'll just say 2.45, but you know, I feel for Rowley and Newbury, I'm not against them. It's just those numbers are so low. I feel like we would be gutting our school district to get there, and I can't support that. So, although I feel for the other 2 communities, I couldn't support kind of anything below kind of anything more than that 432, 651.
Paul Goldner?
2.625. We're cutting things here that are going to impact our students over the long term, and that those essential and TLC combination may or may not hold. So that's 200. Next year is not going to be an easy budget cycle. They never are. And I can't imagine next year will be. And we're gonna maybe have 200,000 here that we have to put back in order to keep that programming. So cutting more that out, I can't see doing that.
Paulies?
I'm in favor of the 2.45 cut.
Matt?
I don't know, it feels really weird to fight for an override and then keep on cutting. But I think the deck's stacked against us, so I'm in favor of the 2.45.
Marissa?
I'm there as well, at the 2.45. I think, I mean, I don't know, I always look at, like, this is bad, but it can be worse if it fails. And last year, less than half of the towns that went for overrides for their schools passed them. I think we need to have Salisbury as a recommend and then work to get the other 2 passed. And I mean, the odds are against both of them, but if we can hopefully get one and at least get through to this level, I mean, I'd love to think we can just go up from here and get an override pass, but I don't think that's likely. So I don't want to go further down from here. I think we've got to make sure that we keep Salisbury at a recommend.
Paul Myatt?
I'll spare you all the thoughts on my mind and just say that you know where I stand.
I know that Salisbury's at 2.45. Where does Newbury wind up if we put it at 2.45?
Where did they wind up if we're at 2 point? I want to read it, I can't say. 533. Raleigh's at 949.
I'm at the 2.45 as well, because if I fail, I mean, as much as we don't want that number or cut any more than we are already, I just feel that Salisbury has come in with the number that they feel that they can manage without an override. And I have all the confidence that Salisbury will stay with that number and not come back with, they can't support that. So I believe with the tally here, the 2.45 is the target.
And I will reconfirm, I will talk to Neil again and just make sure that I both represented his message. I will encourage him to watch this meeting to make sure he doesn't have time to watch this meeting. But I will talk with him again, and could the number be 2.4475 or 2.5, right? So we'll work toward that number. The one thing I will say as well, to be thinking about as we talk about this next week is whether, regardless, so if we're in the vicinity of 400,000 in additional cuts, do you want those approved and identified within the final budget on March 12th? Or do you want to confirm those as we continue on in the process? So not an answer now, but just something that you will have to confirm next week. Because again, I think we're clearly at individuals. If we pull out 155,000 for buses, that certainly takes a good chunk of that. It gives me pause, but it certainly takes out a good chunk of that. The other thing I will say is, as we go through this process, I think it will be important to clarify with the towns that, so those who've been around a while, right, we always talk about the high water mark is, the tentative budget is the high water mark for assessments. When revenues change after the budget passes, it's largely been an extra $30 per pupil, so we get $63,000, right? We let that flow through to E&D. This could be the type of year where there are a lot of discussions happening. I don't assume millions, but could we get 100,000, 75,000, 150,000? There's some real possibility there. And if that would be the case, I think it's very clear to make sure this would argue towards not fully identifying all of those cuts on March 12th, because then we're identifying people and people are going to go look for jobs. And if people go look for jobs, they could end up being our best and brightest, and they leave before we have a chance to even say, no, wait, we're not really cutting you. So I think that the message needs to be this year, whatever, if that number is 2.45, 2.5, that is the number, those are the assessments, and any additional revenue we get beyond March 12th reduces our reductions we're making. It does not further reduce their assessments. So is that, I'm seeing lots of nods. Is that a approach? Okay. I assumed it would be, didn't want to speak for the whole choir.
I like that idea, and I was also just going to say that timing-wise, we would probably know right around the same time that we know whether this would pass or fail if we're getting additional, because the Senate budget is usually closing the third week of May. So we would know if House and Senate match, and if they do, then you're pretty much guaranteed that revenue. So we would have a much better idea at that point of where we're at. So I do think it's a good idea to say revenues would come back into this budget to be used to offset. Yeah.
Brian? Brian, just in terms of the wellness coordinator, can you just tell me how you arrived at that? Because I know it was just put in place. We fought for a long time to get there. It was my understanding that that was either a state-regulated or a statutorily required position. That was my understanding. I may be wrong. But
Yeah, so I think probably the thing you're thinking about is the fact that we now have newly identified curriculum, state frameworks that were adopted just 24, right? It wasn't 25. It was last year. Was it 20? Yeah, early last year. that's rolled out. So that certainly, that position would be very helpful for Dr. Bates in implementing that. A lot of the work that he's done has been great. I mean, I think we've said this when speaking with him. It's not a position that we're saying we don't want. I think someone just mentioned moments ago, next year's not going to be probably any easier. And I think it's not okay to have a position where people stay committed to a position, and we can't say we're long-term able to commit to a position. So that was why we identified this early, that if we're talking about, last year we got close, this year we're talking about cutting to classroom teachers. If next year we're there again, we're settling teachers and IAs contracts, right? The challenge is there in being able to fund, the competitive wages that we need to pay. So if that's the case, it's just not something, it's a really nice to have, it's a really good thing. It's not a must. That I will say, right, a lot of that falls back to the very agreeable Dr. Bates over here. But we're not, right, we're not alone, but we're not able and currently have a real clear path toward implementing those wellness standards. A lot of districts are struggling with that, right? We're not alone in that. But that's a huge loss. But when we're talking about direct classroom instruction, it's hard to argue that we keep it. Yeah. We'd love to find a place for him if there was another position he could slide into that wasn't getting cut. He's excellent.
Next week is the public hearing, as well as our state legislators coming. So I'm sure that our select boards will be here as well.
With DCC tomorrow, right?
Right, but I believe that they'll be there with the state legislators. I believe some of our selectmen will be there. I know it's a tough budget. I think it gets worse and worse every year, and I think that's what we have to convey to our state legislators. I know that they're doing the best that they can with what they can help us with. By having our select board, our legislators here, and us, it takes a village, and our village is not very happy with this budget. So can I have a motion to adjourn?
Make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?